Some betrayals happen in an instant, but their impact lasts a lifetime. For Clara, a quiet confession one night left scars that even decades couldn't heal. What happened, and why does it still haunt her? Let's unravel the story. Clara is in her 70s now, living a life full of memories, but one moment from her past refuses to fade. It's a story about forbidden feelings, blurred boundaries, and a betrayal that redefined her idea of love and trust. This is Clara's untold story. Clara couldn't sleep the night Alex confessed his feelings. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his words echoing in her mind. "I've been in love with you for years." The intensity in his voice, the way he looked at her, it wasn't something she could dismiss as a teenage phase or a fleeting moment of confusion. She felt a chill run through her, not from fear, but from the profound unease of realizing just how deeply Alex had misinterpreted their bond. The next day, Clara resolved to act like nothing had happened. She thought that if she ignored it, Alex would eventually let it go. But Alex had other plans. He began texting her more often, his words dripping with longing and desperation. "You're all I think about, Clara," one message read. "You're the only one who's ever understood me." At first, Clara tried to reason with him through her replies. "Alex, I care about you, but this isn't right. Please stop thinking this way," she wrote. But her messages only seemed to encourage him. One afternoon, Alex appeared at her door unannounced, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. Clara hesitated before letting him in, her heart pounding. "What are you doing here, Alex?" she asked, trying to sound firm. "I wanted to see you," he said simply, handing her the flowers. Clara felt her throat tighten as she accepted the bouquet. "This isn't appropriate," she said, placing the flowers on the counter. "You can't just show up like this." Alex stepped closer, his eyes locking onto hers. "Why not?" he asked, his voice soft but insistent. "You're always there for everyone else." "Let me be here for you?" Clara stepped back, her pulse racing. "Alex, you need to leave," she said firmly, her voice trembling. He hesitated, but eventually walked out the door, leaving Clara to collapse into a chair, her hands shaking. The flowers sat on the counter like a reminder of the boundary Alex had crossed. Over the next few weeks, Alex's behavior only escalated. At family gatherings, he made sure to sit beside Clara, his presence magnetic and suffocating at the same time. He found ways to touch her, a hand on her shoulder as he leaned in to whisper something, his knee brushing against hers under the dinner table. Each small gesture sent Clara's nerves into overdrive. One evening, Clara was alone in the living room after a family dinner, scrolling through her phone when Alex joined her. He sat down beside her, closer than usual. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his tone accusing but tinged with hurt. Clara sighed, putting her phone down. "Alex, you're making this difficult for both of us. You need to stop." "I can't," he said, his voice cracking. "I don't want to stop. I know you feel something too. Clara, you don't have to say it. I can see it in your eyes." Clara's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. She hated how his words made her feel, like she was the one at fault, like she had done something to encourage him. "I love you, Alex," she said finally, her voice steady. "But only as family. That's all it will ever be." But Alex wasn't deterred. He reached out, his hand brushing against hers. "If that's true," he whispered, "why do you keep running away?" Clara pulled her hand back as if his touch burned her. "Because this isn't right," she said sharply, standing up. "And you need to understand that." Clara was 42 when it happened. At that time, she was the kind of woman everyone depended on. She was strong, nurturing, and always there to support her family. Her nephew Alex, who had just turned 18, was no exception. After his parents' divorce, Clara had stepped in to give him the stability and care he desperately needed. For Alex's 18th birthday, Clara went all out, hosting a family gathering at her home. The house was filled with laughter, music, and the smell of his favorite chocolate cake baking in the oven. Clara was thrilled to see Alex smiling. After all, he deserved to feel celebrated. But that evening, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Alex seemed unusually quiet, his eyes lingering on her in ways that made her feel uneasy. She brushed it off, assuming he was just overwhelmed by the attention. Later, after the guests had left and Clara was cleaning up in the kitchen, Alex walked in. "You don't have to do all this alone," he said softly, stepping closer to her. Clara turned to him with a smile. "It's fine, Alex. It's your birthday. You should be relaxing." But instead of leaving, Alex stayed, his expression serious. "Clara," he began, his voice trembling, "I need to tell you something. I've been keeping it in for so long and I can't anymore." Clara paused, sensing the tension in his voice. "What is it, Alex?" she asked gently. "I'm in love with you," he said, his words heavy and deliberate. "Not as an aunt, but as a woman. I've been in love with you for years." The tension between them reached its breaking point one evening when Alex showed up at her house again, this time with a letter. He handed it to her silently, his hands shaking slightly. Clara hesitated before opening it, her heart sinking as she read the words. "You've always been the most important person in my life," it began. "You've shown me love when no one else did, and I can't imagine my life without you. I know this isn't what you want to hear, but I can't stop loving you. Please don't push me away." Tears blurred Clara's vision as she finished reading. She felt trapped, suffocated by the weight of Alex's emotions and her own guilt. She wanted to protect him, to help him understand that his feelings weren't real. But every attempt seemed to push him deeper into his obsession. Clara decided she couldn't avoid the situation any longer. She needed to have a final, clear conversation with Alex to put an end to this once and for all. Clara knew the situation had spiraled out of control. Alex's feelings were no longer something she could brush off or hope would fade. The late-night messages, the unexpected visits, the increasingly intense looks and lingering touches, it had all become too much. She needed to confront him directly, to finally put an end to the tension that was tearing her apart. She asked Alex to meet her at a nearby park, choosing a neutral and public setting to keep things calm. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the grassy expanse as Clara approached the bench where Alex was waiting. He sat hunched over, his hands clasped tightly together, his expression a mix of nervousness and hope. When Clara reached him, she forced a small smile and sat down, deliberately leaving space between them. The air felt heavy with unspoken words, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "Thank you for coming," Clara began, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "Of course," Alex replied, his tone soft. "I've been waiting for this." Clara's stomach twisted. Waiting for what? She thought. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "Alex, we need to talk seriously about what's been happening," she said. "About everything you've been saying and doing." Alex turned to face her fully, his expression earnest. "I know what you're going to say," he said quickly, cutting her off. "But before you do, just listen. I know how you feel, Clara. I can see it in the way you look at me. You're just scared to admit it." His words struck Clara like a blow. She opened her mouth to respond, but Alex continued, his voice growing more passionate. "Why does it matter what other people think?" he asked, leaning closer to her. His knee brushed against hers, and Clara felt a jolt of discomfort. Love doesn't care about age or labels, or what's supposed to be right. "You can't tell me you don't feel it too." Clara felt her resolve falter for a brief, agonizing moment. The intensity of his gaze, the way his voice trembled with emotion. It all felt so raw, so genuine. For a second, she questioned herself. Had she been too harsh? Too quick to dismiss his feelings? But then reality crashed back into her like a wave. She wasn't just dealing with Alex's emotions, she was dealing with his confusion, his misplaced admiration, his desperation for something he couldn't fully understand. "No, Alex," she said finally, her voice breaking. "This isn't love, it's something else. Something that's been twisted by everything you've been through. But it's not love." Alex's face hardened, his hands balling into fists on his lap. "How can you say that?" he asked, his voice rising. "You're the only person who's ever cared about me, who's ever made me feel like I mattered. How can you stand there and tell me that doesn't mean anything?" Tears stung Clara's eyes. She hated seeing him like this, so vulnerable, so full of pain. But she couldn't let his emotions dictate her response. She had to be strong for both of them. "Alex, I care about you deeply," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "But only as family, that's all it will ever be. That's all it can ever be." Alex's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Clara thought he might argue further. But then his shoulders sagged, and the fire in his eyes dimmed. "So that's it?" he asked quietly, his voice raw. "You're just going to walk away?" Clara's heart broke at the pain in his voice. She wanted to comfort him, to tell him that everything would be okay. But she knew that any gesture of kindness would only blur the lines further, and she couldn't afford to make that mistake. "I have to," she said softly, tears streaming down her face. "For both our sakes." Alex stared at her for a long moment, his expression a mix of anger, heartbreak, and disbelief. Then, without another word, he stood and walked away. his shoulders hunched against the weight of her rejection. Clara remained on the bench, watching him disappear into the distance. She felt hollow, as though a piece of her had been ripped away. She knew she had done the right thing, but the pain of that moment was almost unbearable. She sat there until the sun dipped below the horizon, the shadows growing longer around her. For the first time, she let herself cry, not just for Alex, but for the bond they had lost and the trust that had been broken. After the confrontation in the park, Clara felt an overwhelming sense of relief mixed with an unbearable sadness. She had said the words she needed to say, drawn the boundaries she needed to draw. But the emotional weight of it all lingered. As she walked home that evening, the quiet streets around her seemed to echo with Alex's voice, his pain etched in her memory like a wound that refused to heal. In the days that followed, Clara avoided family gatherings where she knew Alex might be present. It wasn't just to give him space, it was also because she wasn't sure she could face him again. The bond they once shared, the ease of their relationship, felt irreparably damaged. Clara missed the boy who used to make her laugh with his silly jokes, the boy she had once been so proud to call her nephew. For a while, Alex continued to reach out. His texts became less frequent, but no less emotional. "I don't understand how you can just walk away," one message read. Another said, "You're the only person I've ever loved. Do you even care what this is doing to me?" Clara read each message with a heavy heart, but she knew she couldn't reply. Any response would only reignite the feelings she was trying so desperately to extinguish. Eventually, the text stopped altogether, and Clara allowed herself to hope that Alex was beginning to move on. Years passed, and Clara heard through the family that Alex had gone to college, started a career, and eventually married. She should have felt relief, knowing that he had built a life for himself. But the news was bittersweet. It was a reminder of how much time had passed since they last spoke, of the closeness they had lost. Now, in her 70s, Clara often reflects on that chapter of her life. She sits in her quiet home, surrounded by photographs of her family, and wonders if Alex thinks about her the way she thinks about him. Does he remember the confrontation in the park? Does he still carry the pain of that rejection? Or has he found a way to let it go? Clara knows she did the right thing. She protected both of them from crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. But that doesn't make the memories any less painful. She often replays the moments they shared before everything changed. The way Alex used to look up to her, the way he used to trust her implicitly. Those memories are now tinged with sadness, like a beautiful painting splattered with dark streaks of guilt and regret. One evening, as Clara flips through an old photo album, she comes across a picture of Alex at his 18th birthday party. In the photo, he's laughing, surrounded by balloons and family. His youthful energy practically leaps off the page. Clara stares at the picture for a long time, her fingers tracing the edges of the photograph. She remembers the boy he was before everything became so complicated. She remembers the way he used to confide in her, the way he trusted her to be his safe haven. And she wonders, did she fail him? Could she have handled things differently? Helped him understand his feelings without severing the bond they shared? But deep down, Clara knows that some wounds are inevitable. Alex's feelings were never something she could control, and her rejection, though painful, was necessary. She couldn't give him what he wanted, not without destroying both of them in the process. Decades later, Clara has made peace with the fact that some relationships don't have tidy resolutions. She knows that Alex's feelings weren't entirely his fault, just as her guilt isn't entirely hers. They were both caught in something larger than themselves, something neither of them was equipped to navigate. Even now, late at night, Clara sometimes whispers a silent apology to Alex, an apology for the trust that was broken, for the love that was misunderstood, and for the bond that could never fully be repaired. But she also whispers a quiet hope, a hope that Alex has found happiness, that he has built a life free of the shadows of their shared past, a hope that he has forgiven her, even if she has never quite forgiven herself. Lara often tells herself that some stories are meant to remain unfinished. They don't end neatly or cleanly. They leave behind scars, lessons, and a deep understanding of the complexities of love and trust. And while the pain of those moments may never fully fade, Clara carries them with a quiet strength, knowing that she did what she could with the cards they were dealt. Thank you for watching this deeply emotional and thought-provoking story. If you found yourself captivated by the twists and turns of Clara's journey, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We share stories that leave an impact, and your support helps us continue to bring them to life. Hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next video.